Hello, welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us for tonight's Preservation School class on Historic Lighting Restoration with Aurora Lampworks. We have several walking tours coming up. The History and Architecture of Downtown Brooklyn on October 26th, 10 minutes from everywhere, a walking tour of unlandmarked Rose Hill on September 12th, the Coops and Beyond Housing and Development in Allerton and Pellerton Parkway on September 21st, and the Landmarks Lion Gala honoring Michael Hiller on October 29th. Information about all of our upcoming programming can be found on our website, hdc.org. If you have any questions about programming, you can contact me at marbulu@hdc.org. Tonight's class will be recorded and posted to our YouTube channel for free viewing. You may also watch all of our previous Preservation School classes, virtual tours, and conference panels on our YouTube channel. I would like to thank the New York City Department of Cultural Affairs, City Council, and the New York State Council on the Arts for supporting Preservation School. If you have any questions, you can add them to the chat and Kate will address them at the end. Now, I will hand it over to Aurora Lampworks' Kate Hush to lead tonight's class. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining me for this. My name is Kate Hush, and I am an artist and fabricator who has worked in glass studios for a while. And then I found myself working at a wonderful place called Aurora Lampworks in Brooklyn. And what we focus on is preserving history and restoring antique fixtures. And an exciting project that they did is actually the first one that I worked on with them was the St. George Theater in Staten Island, and I'm excited to share some information about it with you. So let's get started. So a little bit more about us. Like I said, I am an artist who has worked with both glass and lighting in New York City for over a decade. So that's kind of given me a skill set that was perfect for this job because it was electrical, it was lighting, and it was the perfect pairing of what I do. And I'm mainly for glass, I've done fused glass, I've done cold working, but my main medium in glass was neon. So I'm going to show you a few pieces that I've done just so you can get some context. Here's one piece. And I did all the wiring on that as well. Here's another piece, and I'm really used to working with very, very fragile glass, which was an important part of this job. So Aurora Lampworks has been around for a while. It began in Connecticut, and it was a restored antique fixture showroom. And then they moved to New York City, and they work on some of the oldest, coolest things I've ever gotten to see and put my hands on. They do a lot of stuff for the Frick collection. We have this really amazing chandelier that I just helped reassemble and put together, and it was made in the early or the late 1800s, which might be the oldest lamp I've worked on. So they really, replicate and preserve and restore and conserve all of these amazing fixtures that otherwise would just be lost to history. And we do it with fixtures from all over the world. And it's a really exciting job to be able to be a part of. It's really rewarding. So this is Dawn Ladd. She is the founder and owner of Aurora Lampworks, and she's been at this for a long time. And without her, we would have no one to steer the ship. So this presentation is also, she is a big part of it, even though I am the one speaking. And I'm just glad to get to do what we do here and preserve history, especially in New York City. There's some really interesting stuff that I don't think a lot of people know about. And this is one of them, St. George. So I hope you are excited to learn more about it. But before we get to that, I wanted to highlight a few of the beautiful jobs that Aurora has done around the city and around the tri-state. So this is chandeliers that were restored for the Rose Reading Room in the New York Public Library. Beautiful stuff. And then we also have these chandeliers from St. Paul's Chapel. Beautiful. Look at all that crystal. I can't imagine. And then here's the Sterling Memorial Library in New Haven, all that beautiful metal uplighting you see towards the floor. And then we have this beautiful hanging fixture for the Park Avenue Armory Veterans Room, just that beautiful old ironwork fitted with new light light bulbs and wiring, and it's just incredible stuff. And then the showpiece and what we're going to talk about tonight, we have the St. George Theater in Staten Island. And before I get into the restoration process, I wanted to talk about, a little bit about the history of St. George Theater. I don't know about anybody else in New York, but I know a lot of people that have been in this city for 10, 15 plus years that have never been to Staten Island. So I hope you'll go if you haven't. And if you haven't, I hope this will give you a reason to, because it's a beautiful, beautiful theater that you should not miss. So I'm going to go into a brief history of the St. George Theater, which is it's located in the northeastern tip of the island, and that is one of the most densely populated areas. So there's a lot going on over there, and it's also right near the Staten Island ferry drop off. You could take the ferry, get off, and you would be at the St. George Theater within a 5-minute walk. That's how easy it is to get to. And just to give it some context, the St. George Theater is right there on the upper right in the St. George neighborhood. They're called the same thing. And then on the right, I have kind of a bigger map of the city so you can kind of see where that is. So what St. George is known as a picture palace. And a picture palace were these movie theaters built across the country in the early 1900s. And that's really when, the Baroque style was having a boom over here. And they're so like luxurious and opulent and like everything is ornate. There is not one surface, left behind that isn't perfectly detailed with a floral or a pattern. And I have some examples to show you of these types of theaters across the country. So this is the Bird Theater in Richmond, Virginia. And then we have the Tampa Theater in Tampa, Florida. Really beautiful, really ornate. You can kind of get an idea of what's to come. Here is the Aztec Theater in San Antonio. And then, of course, we have the St. George Theater. So a little history about the St. George Theater. The construction was started in 1928, and then it was officially opened to the public in 1929. That if you walk in there and you go in there, that just seems like the most incredible feat to get that done in a year or a little over a year. And the architects behind that were Eugene DeRosa and then James Whitford, who was a Staten Island resident, and he was known as the Dean of Staten Island because he did so many build outs there. So then we have the interior designer, and that was Nestor Castro. And he really was inspired by elements of both Spanish and Italian Baroque. And you can see in this image is really screaming Baroque. You see the painted pattern on the wall, all of the gold moldings and the ornaments and the filigree. And even up in the right corner, you can kind of see that dome design that's also very intricate. So, like I've been saying, Baroque is very maximalist. It's not minimal. There's no detail left behind. It's very opulent. Nothing is unpatterned. And even they don't even have, just the normal column. You can see that detail where it's twisting up and it's painted this gleaming gold. And they have a lot of those details all around the St. George Theater. This is the lounge of the St. George Theater downstairs, which is also really beautiful. They left no room behind. Even the lower floor and the basement looks as beautiful as this. So the tough thing when I was putting this presentation together was it was so incredibly hard to find any images or any footage of St. George from pre-2005, if you would believe it. I searched old newspapers. I searched the Internet Archive where you can look at really old books, and not much came up. But what I was able to get, I wanted to show you just so you could kind of see an image of it captured in time, even though some are black and white or grainy. I think it's still really cool to see. So here's an older image of the interior of the main theater. And in the center at the top, you'll see that's the chandelier that we worked on. And the funny thing is, by the time we got to it, it was pretty, stained and dirty just from being there for over 100 years. But you can even see in this image at the top that the painting details compared to the glass were very high contrast. And that I think that's a cool little detail that you can pick out here. Here's another image, and this is the main room after the entrance. It's the lobby, and you go up those stairs and to the right, and there's a theater. And then here's an exterior shot of the St. George. And the marquee and the signage has changed, I discovered a few times over the years. So this isn't even the original. This, I think, was 70s or 80s. Unfortunately, these photos weren't dated, but that is my best guess after all of the research I've done. And then here's a fun picture I found on this great website I found called cinematreasures.org that organizes pages on all of the picture palaces in the United States. And they have some really interesting photos and information about all of them. So this is the inside of the lobby. And this is back when the St. George was actually a movie theater. Now it only does performances. But here you can see they decorated the lobby for the Sands of Iwo Jima. And you can even see in the background the candelabra lights at the top. We also restored those. So it's fun to be able to see them 50 plus years earlier than when we had our hands on them. And then here is another older photo in color of the main lobby. And then you can kind of get like a taste of the chandelier and the painted glass panels that we restored towards the bottom of that chandelier at the top. So then here's another view of the theater and another image of the marquee. I think this is even different. The first one that you saw that had the similar typeface, I think these three-dimensional letters had been removed, but here they are in place, or they were added. So the history of the St. George Theater is it changed hands a lot of times over the years. And from the late 70s on, a, I think it had changed the most hands. And they tried so many things with it. They turned it into dinner theaters, they turned it into nightclubs, they even turned it into an antique showroom. And the one thing they didn't really do well was try to restore it. They tried to bring people in under different avenues, but they weren't keeping up with many of the repairs. And as the years went on, it would get more and more and more shabby and degraded. And more people would say, oh, this isn't worth saving. We're just going to demolish it. And that was kind of the status quo for 30 plus years was like, oh, when are they going to shut that place down? And that is until 2004. And that is when one Staten Island woman, she's known as Mrs. Rosemary, stepped in to save the theater. She would go there as a child, and she loved it so much that she just could not see it go to ruin. She is a dancer and she loves theater and she loves performing arts. And with her daughters, they all came together and stepped in and they actually created a not-for-profit organization to fund saving this theater and restoring it to its former glory. And also on top of that, Mrs. Rosemary donated her life savings and got everything into motion. She's an incredible woman. And I have a video to show you shortly after this because I think it's so important in the context of everything to understand what these women really did. And here they are. Here are Rosemary in the gray sweater, and then her daughters, Ro, Doreen, and Luann. And when we were at the theater, we would talk to and see Doreen and Luann from time to time, and they're so funny and they're so great. And I couldn't have asked for like more easy people to work with. So here is the video. It's about 7, 8 minutes long, but I think it's really worth the watch.
Once grand movie palace had become an uphill battle. It was sort of like a big white elephant. You had all this beautiful architectural wonder around you, but it was also starting to fail and fade and was very expensive to bring it back or maintain it. One by one, each new endeavor failed, and the wrecking ball drew ever closer. Until the abandoned stage piqued the interest of a well-known Staten Island resident and her family. Rosemary Capozzalo, a Juilliard-trained dancer, teacher, and mother of 3 daughters, ran 2 small dance schools on Staten Island. To her students and community, she was known as Mrs. Rosemary.
She was married at the early age of 18. Back then, that's what you did. And then she had a baby at 19. And to supplement the family income, she decided to teach the neighborhood children dance.
She started with 40 students, the following year 80, the following year 300, and so on and so on.
Mrs. Rosemary's daughters also grew up dancing and performing.
And second, and down, Serena.
They helped her build the small dance schools into a flourishing family business.
And round, and flatten, sit up.
Through the 1960s, Mrs. Rosemary had rented the St. George Theater for dance school performances. But by the 1990s, the aging venue had become more trouble than it was worth.
Just to go in and use it and rent it for our weekend of dance recitals, we'd have to do major renovations and cleaning. We'd spend a week down there cleaning every single seat. It was like 70 years of filth, you know?
By 2003, after 30 years of different owners and makeovers, the theater's future looked bleak.
It was a white elephant. Nobody wanted it. It would just cost too much money. It was too much of an obligation, too much of a responsibility.
In one last effort, the owner at the time offered to sell the abandoned theater to Mrs. Rosemary.
We came, looked at it, my sisters and I were her right and left hand, and we knew we couldn't purchase the theater at a $5 million ticket and bring this place back in order.
Faced with the fate of the St. George, Mrs. Rosemary decided she could not let the tattered theater fall silent forever.
My mom grew up in this theater. I loved hearing the stories that her brothers and her would come here and see movies and double features. They'd even have ballroom nights here. She loved this theater. So we reached out and we said, if we start a nonprofit, would you donate it to us? The rest is history.
Mrs. Rosemary used her home as collateral to take over the existing mortgage on the theater. Over the next 2 years, she would pour more than $1 million in loans and her own life savings to finance the initial restoration.
I mean, that's a commitment. And the beauty of it is she had support of her family.
The family established a nonprofit to restore the theater, and a small group of local community leaders stepped in to form its board of directors. Finally, in 2004, the St. George Theater was under new management and ready to be transformed.
It was just a shell of a theater, and it had just like a film all over it. It needed a lot of love, to say the least.
When we came in here, there was a hole on the stage about the size of a car could fall in. There were no curtains. There were no railings in the orchestra. There's no seating on the first floor.
My mother would say the only ones finding comfort in the theater were the birds and the raccoons.
The family wanted to restore the St. George to its previous splendor as a true performance venue. That meant undoing some of the damage the theater had sustained over the decades.
The new owners at the time decided to make the St. George Theater a nightclub. So they flattened out, I would say, 2/3 of the orchestra level that we see now.
Our vision was to make it shine once again and bring it back to what the theater was meant to be, a live theater. See, that's what no one else did.
We began renovations right away. We got 1 million bids, from roofing to painting to electrical, plumbing, seating, restoration.
With the theater and dance schools to run, the family had their hands full. The oldest daughter, Rosemary, or Ro, stayed on to work at the dance studio, while Doreen and Luann spent long hours with their mother at the theater.
And when we're on the top of the step on the ladder and the Windex would fall and it'd be 2 o'clock in the morning, my mother would say, it's time to call it a night. Let's go home.
Within the first 12 weeks of taking over the building, Mrs. Rosemary and her daughters began their first attempts at hosting programs.
Right away, we wanted to bring in the biggest headliners here. We wanted to do local entertainment. We wanted to have graduations here.
I remember getting off the phone, Doreen was doing programming, and she hung up the phone and said, Howie Mandella's coming. I said, great, now all we need is lights, sound, and chairs.
Despite all of their hard work, putting the theater back on the map was a lonely endeavor.
We felt like orphans. We knew people were behind us, but not yet. They'd pat us on the back, nice work, nice work.
You know, you hate to say this, but a lot of guys think that a woman was never going to be able to do it. Particularly a woman who ran a little dance school.
In the beginning, see, no one knew of us. No one knew of the St. George Theater. So we went to every fundraiser, every Rotary meeting, breakfast, grandmother's club, wherever they would have us, we were there.
When I came in 7 months ago with my daughters, the first thing we had to do was put a new roof on. There was no carpet, no lights, no railing, no stairs.
Thanks to Mrs. Rosemary's unwavering will, the theater received a critical lifeline in 2007 from then Borough President Jim Molinaro.
When you see that type of dedication and commitment, you say, my God, I got to help that person. Because she's not doing it just for herself, she's doing it for the community.
The borough president allocated $1.5 million from his budget to support the restoration, giving Mrs. Rosemary and her daughters the additional boost of capital and confidence that they needed. With the restoration underway and the support of the community behind them, the family's vision for the theater finally became a reality.
My daughters and I welcome you to the historic St. George Theater.
We felt like we were making that quantum leap. It wasn't much, but if you think 365 days before, wow, look what we did this year.
I think it was the second year that we finally could breathe and say, We got through the hard times. I think it's going to be okay. It's going to work.
The St. George Theater had come back to life. People in the neighborhood began to notice.
Okay, so that's where I cut it off. It was really hard to choose what clip to play because I just didn't want to stop, but I couldn't play the whole episode. So what this clip was from is a great series by PBS called New York City Treasures, and if you Google it, you can go on their website and they have every episode, the full episode for free online. So if you want to know even more, just head over there to their website. And then moving on.
Once grand movie.
So now I'm going to start talking about actually going into the St. George Theater and the first look that Aurora had at the chandelier, which was not so up close because you needed scaffolding to actually get up there and really see it. So they went in and they really could only see it from certain views. And then a couple fun facts about the chandelier. It's really big. I know 29 feet might not sound big, but when you're right up next to it, it almost dwarfs you. It's a huge chandelier. And that's from the bottom of it to where it hangs up in the ceiling, like at the canopy. And the chandelier itself, from the bottom of the chandelier to the top of it where the chain starts, is about 18 feet. So the scaffolding we had to go on was in two separate levels because, you can't reach up 18 feet from scaffold, and they don't want you having a ladder that tall on scaffolding, which I wouldn't do anyway. Everything we did was OSHA approved, by the way. And then another fun thing about the lamp was just how many light bulbs were in it. There were so many light bulbs, and there was almost no access into the chandelier. And I think all of us to this day are still puzzled at how they changed the light bulbs in this. They must have used one of those, 5-foot grabber things. Otherwise, they had to take glass panels out to do it. And so there's 235 lights in this chandelier, and there's 6 separate circuits, which is a lot to get a handle on and wire. And we did it though, and now so everything is energy efficient, and there's LED bulbs in there now, and it's UL listed as well. So here's some images I have to share of the very first look that Aurora got at this chandelier. So here it is in all its glory. And as you can see, not everything is lit up in it because I think access to get in there and change the bulbs was so difficult, especially at the top. We actually had to cut one of those iron panels off that you see in that top portion, and we created a door that opens and swings open so you get easier access to change the light bulbs in there. And I found online when I was researching this that there is a catwalk above the chandelier, but I almost think they might have removed it because we all went way up there and I didn't notice it, but maybe it's hidden behind the ceiling. I'd love to find out if that catwalk is still up there. So here's another image from below, and you can see some of the original painted details and all of those glass panels. And you can see how kind of mucky they are. And if you really pay attention, there seems to be less than 10 bulbs lit on this fixture. So it was really important that we got there and made easy access for them. So then after we went on site and got a look at the chandelier and kind of made a game plan, the scaffolding was built and we had to go in and start disassembling it. So here's some images from on site. This image on the left is the very top portion of the chandelier, and that's actually where we made the door. One of those rectangular panels now swings open so you can reach in there and change the light bulbs in there. And you can see that's also the second story of scaffolding that we worked off of to get access to the higher point. And on the right is a view from the first tier or the first floor of the scaffolding up into the second tier. And you can even see so much detail was paid that the bottom of that top tier on the chandelier also has all those triangular glass panels in it. And then here's another up close look at the chandelier from the scaffolding. I think they had just started to disassemble it. You can kind of see on the bottom, that bottom dome kind of dangling. And here are some of my coworkers getting a closer look at the chandelier. This is Barbara on the left and Manuel on the right, getting an idea of the guts of what's in there and kind of looking at the condition of the glass and how it should be taken apart. And then here's a fun look at over the large bottom portion of the chandelier. And this should give you an idea of just how many light bulbs are in there. That's a lot of them. And this one was a little easier to access because as you can see, those are more contemporary light bulbs. I don't think we found any really, really old ones, but I still don't understand how they changed them in the very top portion. And you can also notice there's some glass that was just missing as well that we had to take care of. So here is an up close look at some of the original panels. And you can see the beautiful like Baroque crest design that goes across 3 sets of glass. So it goes from the top one to the middle to the bottom, and it's all one continuous design. And you have to be really careful and wear a mask because also as I was researching, I found out when this was built and created, 1920s in the United States was, I guess, the boom of lead paint use. So we had to be like really careful. We wore gloves, we wore masks when we handled all of this because some of it was flaking off a bit when we were taking it apart. So the first pieces of glass that we removed on the top were the multicolored panes, and they were fairly easy to get out because they were just held in by tabs that kind of folded over and held them in. So we would just gently open the tab, not breaking it, and pull the glass out. And we would do it by getting on a ladder and kind of going over the top because we hadn't removed the glass on the bottom yet. That was the very first glass that we removed. And that was actually, I think, my first day at Aurora was going right to Staten Island and starting work on removing all of this glass. So that came out pretty easy. We packed that all away and then we said, okay, let's start our work on the other panels of glass. And then we found out because silicone or caulk and the way you know it today in a tube that squeezes out, like silicone was a thing. A scientist had isolated it and discovered the polymers, but it wasn't used as an adhesive quite yet. So they used plaster to help secure these glass panels into the iron fixture. And I also think that they used it to cover light leaks. Because when you're manipulating glass, I feel like especially back then, it's all handmade. It wasn't a lot of machinery and you're not doing anything digital. So even if you had a jig or something and you thought you were getting that perfect curve, there's glass manipulation is tough and some pieces didn't sit exactly right in the iron fixture. So I think the plaster played a role in both holding it in and filling in any gaps between the metal and the glass. But the thing about that was the plaster had been there so many years, it was almost like it cured and cured and cured over time, and it was as hard as cement. And I think the first panel we tried to get out, we just knew it was going to crack. So we made a good attempt at it, and then we just said we have to stop and find another way. And that's when we devised a plan to fill spray bottles with water. And we weren't sure it was going to work because the plaster was so hard and it almost had a shiny, like a sheen to it, like plastic. And we were like, this is so old. Is this even capable of absorbing water after all of this time? So we did a few tests and we were pleasantly surprised that the more we just kept wetting it and wetting it and wetting it, and eventually it would start crumbling off and getting softer. So we could take, a chisel and a hammer and gently, gently tap it to get it to crumble off. And that's how we were able to get a lot of the panels out. So this is my other coworker, Orist, and he's here and you'll see he's improvising a chisel and he has, the wrench and the flathead screwdriver, and in the bottom right corner of this photo is the bottle of water. And if you can see where his right underneath his hand, you can kind of see where the plaster was starting to crumble from him chiseling. So it was tedious and it took a while, but it was worth it because we were able to get most of the panels out of there without cracking or breaking. So that worked for a majority of them, but there were some of the panels with very, very, very stubborn plaster. So we had to basically break out a saw, an electric saw, also known as an oscillating tool. And very, very carefully but forcefully, my coworker Manuel lined up the blade exactly where the plaster was between the panels of glass and was very good about not cutting over the glass. He was dead on. And this is him doing it. He had to cut in between those two panels and stay over the iron frame. And I don't think anything ended up breaking with that method. Most of the stuff that broke had already had a crack in it or just had missing pieces completely. So here's a couple more views of taking these glass panels out on the bottom. And then eventually, with the chiseling, with the oscillating tool, we had all of the glass removed from the chandelier and cataloged and labeled. So that's me over there with a Sharpie writing on the shipping box. I had a big list too. You can see the yellow notepad of everything we took out of the chandelier and what section it went in. So now we had all of the glass panels removed and didn't have an incredible amount of breakage, but there were a few that weren't in great shape just because they were there so long, they broke over time. So the second part of the restoration is in studio. And that's kind of where I took over and had agency over most of that. So the first thing we had to do was really clean these panels. I don't even know if I can describe the amount of buildup on them, but around here we like to call it cosmic dust. And we tried a couple methods. The first thing I did was I went over a pass with a really mild detergent, watered down, and a soft cloth. And that worked pretty well, but it did take a couple passes to really get some of the grime off without disturbing the paint. And that's what this looked like. So here on the left is the original panel, and it's opaque. You can't see through it at all. I still remember I soaked these in really, really hot water too, the ones that weren't painted. And when I took them out and did the first wipe, I couldn't believe how clean the glass had become. It looks like brand new glass. That's the same panel on the left and the right. And you can see all the beautiful like seedy element element of design to it. It was like brand new except for that little notch, but that's what holds it into the chandelier. So then here's another example of a before and after. Again, couldn't see through it. It was opaque, covered in grime. And then on the right, crystal clear. You could see right through it and the light shines through beautifully. So the challenge was the unpainted glass panels, getting to soak them in the water. They cleaned up really nicely and they looked brand new, as I said. But the painted panels were a little different during the cleaning process. So the first thing I did was I did clean them the same way I had been cleaning the unpainted panels, but there was just this layer of grime that would not budge, would not come off, no matter what I did. So this is an example. So on the left is the glass pre-cleaned, and on the right is the glass after cleaning, and you can still kind of see where the paint was applied. None of that dirt wanted to come off. I think the best example of it is if you look at the lines at the top, and that kind of, you could see that splotchy brown. We just could not get that off of the glass. And we were, pondering for a while what to do because we tested a couple methods, and the most important thing for us was to not disturb that original image. So here's another detail of the glass after cleaning. So after a few tests where we were trying to really get the glass around the painted elements clean, it was either taking off the original paint or we just could not get that grime off. So the decision was made collectively between us and St. George that the best method would be to recreate the designs. So just wipe the glass off and start over. So while a lot of the panels were fully intact because we were careful with the plaster and everything, it's glass. And over time, there's just so many incidents that can make it break. So there were some pieces that were cracked, that were broken, that were missing segments out of them. And before we could even think about repainting, we had to restore these panels of glass. So this is where we really get into the glass making. So here we have the glass work. So the way these glass panels are made is a process called kiln casting or kiln forming or slumping. It's called a couple different terms. And kiln forming glass has been around since the early BC age. And over time, technologies in the material for mold making and the ovens that we use have advanced. The way that you actually work with glass and its materiality has stayed the same since the beginning of working with hot glass. There's only one way to do it, and you just have to heat it up really high and get it into a molten state. So kiln formed or slumped glass is created by you take a segment of flat glass and you heat it up to a temperature that allows gravity to pull it down. And I have a friend that actually owns a glass kiln studio in Red Hook called Shiny Sparkle Labs, and I thought this was a funny coincidence because I do graphic art for him sometimes, and this is a little video I made that kind of illustrates the process that was used for this St. George glass, was heating it up and having gravity pull it to a curve. So I thought this was a cute little video to show. So that's basically how curved thin glass is made. You put it in the oven and slump it to get the curve. So Aurora does not have a glass oven in our studio. So we work with another place in Brooklyn called Flickinger Glassworks, and they specialize in slumped glass pieces. And here's a few photos of that studio. And he has a plethora of pre-made molds just because they've been open for so many years and have done so many projects that they had a mold we could use already. So we didn't even need to get a custom mold for these. And then here's some photos from the Flickinger studio. And then, like I said, the way glass is manipulated has not changed much over time, and neither has the way color is added to it. So we were really lucky that we could get dead on matches for the color. Like you held the sample up to the older piece, and that's the original piece on the bottom, and these are the two color samples on the top, and even the texture too is exactly the same. And you get color in glass by adding various minerals or metals. And the way that light is absorbed and reflected by them is how you see the color in the glass. So then here is another image of a glass panel. And the way you get those little bubbles you can kind of see on the right, that's called CD glass, which some of these panels had. So there's a couple different methods. There's chemical reactions where you can put sodium bicarbonate or baking soda in there and it creates these bubbles. But you can also force air into it when it's molten, and that will also create the little bubbles there. And then the texture of the glass is usually made by when it's hot, you roll it on top of like a three-dimensional stamp and lift it up, and that's how you get, you know, your ripple textures for your privacy doors or your shower doors and stuff like that. That's how that's made. So then here's another image of color matching, and you can see it's really close. And then here is an actual picture of that's a kiln on the left, and then in the center that's somebody loading glass to be fused in the kiln, and then you shut the door and it does its thing. And then on the right, that illustrates kind of how a flat piece of glass emulates the mold that you put it in once it's heated. So then we get to the painting process. So it was time to start recreating the images, and it was really important to me. I also kind of took charge of that project, and before we even began to try to paint, I meticulously cataloged every design and took photos and did illustrations of what was on there so we wouldn't lose how it was, because we really wanted to stay true to the original artwork. And this is a few photos of that process. So here on the left is holding up that's a little panel from another one of the chandeliers we did that we also had to fix the paint on. So I believe that's Barbara holding it up in a paint store that we often frequent. I think Guerra, it's like on the tip of my tongue. And then on the right is kind of our little paint setup where we were testing different reds for the chandelier to try to get the correct match. You can see all those reds in that palette. And here's some more. And then this is a drawing I made based off of the original panel. As you can see, I measured everything, so I had it to scale. And then what I did was I went onto my computer and drew everything digitally. And you'll notice the inner panels, everything kind of had like a different shape in it. And this was really just to illustrate the color palette. So you can see the top left, the inside designs were going to be yellow in the center and all the outline was dark green. And I thought it was really important to hand paint the inside designs as you go and not go off of a computer image because I think that would stay truer to the original artwork. And then you can see this is one of the sketches I made on the computer. And then on the left was the printout. And then here's some detail images of the original artwork. Some detail images of my digital drawings. And then this is an image. So I actually have a vinyl cutter at home. And what I did was take the outline of the digital drawings I made and I made a stencil of it. So we could apply this stencil to each panel of glass. And that's the way that we stayed true to the original design, at like the most meticulous way possible. There is no like messing up if you're using a stencil. So after nailing down the color palette and we had to reapply the paint, we had to test a lot of paints on the glass because traditionally sign painters that paint on store windows and stuff, they'll use enamel. But it was really, really important to us to make it look beautiful as well. And some of these enamel paints were just way too opaque and streaky, and they just weren't doing this glass and the chandelier justice. You can see the gold at the top is kind of a little too translucent and too gestural. Same here. And on the right, it's a little too opaque. So these were kind of our tests that didn't quite work out. And then this is what we actually ended up going with. I think everybody saw this installed in the chandelier. We took the bottom portion back to the studio, and this is what everybody fell in love with. And they're like, that's it. This is what we have to go with. And here is everything repainted and reinstalled into that bottom portion of the chandelier, and it's all wired and all the lights are behind it. And we even invited Doreen, Mrs. Rosemary's daughter, to come in, and she also loved it. And that was it. This was our finished design, and I think it kind of blew everyone away that saw it. So here's another image.
Good to go.
I don't know why it's cut off, but this was a really cool video of spinning all the designs with the light behind them. So then I see I only have about 5 minutes left, so I'm gonna go through this part pretty fast. This was the final installation and reassembly on site. So here we are, and these are all the brand new glass panels back in the chandelier. And you can see how just bright and gleaming they are. They're shining. Here's an inside look. Here's some close-ups of the painting details. Here's a top with the restored backing there. And there's a full view on the bottom of the top and the bottom without the scaffolding, which I think is really neat to see up close. So everything was put back in place. Everything's wired. All the iron is repainted, the designs on it, and it's just looking beautiful. And the only thing left to do now is lift it back up into the ceiling. And my coworker Barbara took a funny video where they were playing classical music. And on the bottom right, that's Larry. He was the OSHA's safety person that was there every day with us. And it goes really slowly, so you're not really going to see too much of a lift, but it kind of gives you an idea. Can you see it like swinging really slowly? That's because it's moving. But it's you're up in the ceiling hand cranking something, so it's an incredibly slow process. So then we have the finished chandelier lifted to show you. Ta-da! There's that from the bottom view. And I just love how vibrant and light filled the chandelier looks again compared to how opaque and dirty it was. It's really beautiful in person. There's a closer look. Ooh. Oh, I don't know why they're cut off. It's kind of a video of the chandelier in the space. Oh, kind of see it. So that's it. That's my present. Sorry for only leaving 2 minutes for questions. And this is our team. St. George took a time lapse photo or video of us working, and that's what this is. So I'm just gonna... I don't know if there's time for questions, but
A little bit. There's one. Do you think there was a coating applied to the glass over the paint to protect the paint? Perhaps that coating is what you couldn't clean off.
we did talk about that a lot. What we ended up thinking was maybe it was a way to diffuse the light or like, dampen it, kind of like a dimmer, but it just like it did such an injustice to the actual painted art that I think everybody was like, let's get this back to what it was supposed to be. And the light bulbs are different now too. I think they light it probably in a much more pleasant way than before they applied a brown coating, if that's what it actually is.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
How long did the entire process take?
I started in like end of July, and I believe we had the chandeliers up and going like mid October, well, end of October. And I remember this because one of my last days there was near Halloween, and they had an exorcist doll in the lobby. So it was right around like end of October, beginning of November that we got this job finished, which was an incredible feat to do that. And like this place has been being restored for almost 20 years now. That's how long it takes. They have to do it piece by piece.
Yeah, it's much faster than I thought. That's amazing.
Yeah, we work hard.
A lot of people are saying it was great. It was amazing. Great
Oh,
talk.
thank you.
Keep up the great work. Someone asked how much the restoration cost.
I mean, that's always changing. So I'm not sure. You'd have to ask Doreen and Luann. That there's always a change order. So I think th those are the women to go to find out that.
Are there any other questions?
No, well,
I don't
thank
see
you
any.
everyone for coming.
Yes, thank you very much, everyone. Thank you, Kate. This is amazing. Thank you to Aurora for allowing us to see all this. Someone said they've seen it in person and it's stunning.
Oh, it is. Everybody go. Everybody. It's so easy to get to. It's right off the ferry.
I'll go see some live theater.
Yeah. Get a ticket. Have a night out.
Mm-hmm.
See a chandelier.
Well, as you are all aware, this has been recorded. As I said, we have all of our other preservation school classes and a lot of other content on our YouTube channel, so please do check that out. And again, we have a lot of upcoming programming, so please do check out our website. And yes, thank you very much, everyone, and enjoy the rest of your night.
Yeah, thank you so much for coming.